Welcome to the Bridge Builder Program, an initiative of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, where we help you live your faith in the public arena. I'm Jason Atkins, Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, and joining me is our producer and Minnesota Catholic Conference Communications Manager, Kit Sapiniak. Hey, Kit.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this week. Remember, you can always catch us right here every week on the radio, on your favorite podcast app, or now on our YouTube channel. Just search for Minnesota Catholic Conference. Or if you miss an episode, head to our website. It's mncatholic.org/podcast. Jason, I know we got a great interview ahead. Who are you speaking with?
We have with us Ed Condon. He is co-founder and editor of The Pillar, a great and invaluable Catholic news source that's relatively new on the horizon and uncovering some good stories. So we'll be talking with him about journalism, journalistic ethics, and some of his insights related to the unfortunate depending on how you look at it, the withdrawal of our troops from Afghanistan and the failed nation building exercise that we've been engaged in as a nation over the last 20 years there.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to hear what his thoughts are on why building democracy there failed. And so everyone remember, if you ever have an idea for discussions on our podcast, make sure to send us an email. Send us your ideas, your comments. That email address is show@mncatholic.org, or you can just leave us a comment on the YouTube channel, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I will be back at the end of the program with this week's action item.
I'm now joined on the Bridge Builder by Ed Condon. He is editor and co-founder of The Pillar. Before co-founding The Pillar, he worked as the DC editor of the Catholic News Agency and was associate editor of the Catholic Herald. His journalistic work has appeared in multiple publications, including the Washington Post, National Review, the Washington Examiner, the Spectator, First Things, as well as several academic and legal journals. He is a man of many talents. He's a practicing canon lawyer, having worked at dioceses across 3 continents and the Holy See. And formerly, he was involved in professional politics in the United Kingdom. Ed Condon, it's great to be with you. Welcome to the Bridge Builder.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your time as working in British politics, why you got into it, maybe why you got out, and what were some lessons you learned during that time?
Well, as for why I got into it, this is going to sound a little silly, but because quite literally it was there. I grew up for most of my childhood and all of my adolescence in the United Kingdom, in the sort of suburbs of London. And when I finished university over there, I was getting the train into work every day with my first job, which was very nice and for a very respectable Catholic charity and everything. And it was very worthy work. But I'd get off the train every morning and I would see the Palace of Westminster, what most Americans refer to as Big Ben, the big clock and everything. And I'd say, how weird would it be to work in there? How cool would it be? So I tried to find a way. And I like most people getting started in professional politics, I found an entry-level position in the party machine of one of the parties and worked my way up. And I ended up getting to work more or less right across the sort of right angle of the clock tower and everything. It was a really wonderful time. I had a great time. I enjoyed it. Politics it's an adrenaline sport, which is easy to enjoy for a number of years. And I did. I also got to do some really interesting things on some things that I think really matter. I ended up making a bit of a career in educational policy and social mobility policy, as well as international development. Those were sort of the interest areas of the 3 politicians I ended up working for as chief of staff or special advisor and things. In the months before I got married, I ended up getting to spend several months living in Rwanda, working with the government there. And we had a sort of twinning project that would go on with the party I was working for. We'd bring senior politicians as well as volunteers, experts from the legal system, industry, things like that. And we'd run education projects, microfinance projects, all that sort of stuff with Rwanda as it was preparing to join the Commonwealth. So I got to do all sorts of fun things working in UK politics, and I had a great time. As for why I left, it's actually a funny story. One day the Pope came to my office. Benedict XVI made this historic state visit as a pope. Popes have come to the UK before, but it's a pastoral visit as chief shepherd of the Catholics of the country. But Benedict came as a head of state and was received with all of that sort of pomp and circumstance. And I ended up getting a ticket in fact, I got 2 tickets. I brought my wife in the 7th row of his address in Westminster Hall, which is the ancient part of the Palace of Westminster. It was the first meeting hall. It was built in 1100, so it's almost a millennia old. It's where Thomas More was put on trial. It is an incredible building, and I got to sit there in the 7th row as Pope Benedict gave this fantastic address on the place of religion in society, of religion in the conscience of humanity, and the limits of the priorities, first of all, of Catholics participating in the public sphere and the political sphere, but also the limits of that. Where is it too far to go? How, at what point do you stop being a witness on the inside and become a cooperator, that sort of thing. And knowing as I did sort of where the legislative agenda of the government was going, I thought, I think I need to find a new career. I think I need to find a new gig. And that started me looking around for what I could do next. I'd done theology as an undergrad, and I thought about going back and doing more theology, but I'll be honest, I talk a lot about how canon law is actually the supreme sacred science, and part of that is shtick. Part of it is, I think, true, but the bottom line is I'm just not smart enough to do doctoral level theology. It's like nailing Jello to the wall for me. I just can't hold that level of abstraction with any confidence. So I ended up studying canon law and starting over as a canon lawyer, practicing that for a few years, and that's what led me into Catholic journalism.
Outstanding. So in politics, or in a government of the people, by the people, for the people need good information to make political choices, whether it's in elections or policies to support or oppose or speak with their legislator about different things of that nature. The role of journalism today, though, is, in theory at least, serves an important role in that, but it seems more like propaganda. How would you describe the importance of journalism to a good and healthy political culture?
I think the health of journalism is very important. I think journalism has, as you say, a hugely vital public information service role to fairly present, to factually explain, to give people, as you say, the basic building blocks on which public debate can be built. That I think journalism at its most pure is about facilitating that public debate, which you have to have in a democracy, in a society which is open and people make their own choices and things. If you're going to have any kind of common ground, even in which we effectively have an adversarial public space, if that's going to be able to be constructive at all, there has to be a common starting point of a pattern of facts and things that people understand, truths that we might hold to be self-evident, for example. And I think journalism plays a really important role in that. I think we've taken journalism for granted a lot in the last, I'd say 40 years, really. And we tend to think of journalism, especially in the United States, and I haven't seen this in other countries, and I certainly didn't see it in the UK, although full disclosure, I was working on the other side of the argument there. I wasn't a journalist. I was a political staffer. So I had a fairly jaundiced view of journalists. But I think in America, particularly, we have a way of thinking of journalism, which is we've elevated to almost a kind of noble vocation. And I think it can be that. And I think it's important that it tries to be that. But I think we've taken that ideal and we've internalized it so much to the point where we think, well, this is what journalism has always been. And of course, that's not true. I mean, in this country, journalism began with politics, and it was mudslinging. It was propaganda pamphlets published out of Massachusetts, the back rooms of Massachusetts pubs. That's how journalism began in the United States. And it was probably more similar to Twitter than it was, the Wall Street Journal back then. And, but then alongside that, you have the sort of high-minded stuff of like the Federalist Papers and things like that. But even that was very partisan. The idea that journalism is this sort of neutral medium, delivering the facts without slant. I think that's something we had to learn the utility of. And we had a kind of golden era. And we've slipped away from that. And we're falling back into the more sort of mudslinging partisan conception of all journalism and media. And there's a downside to that for us. And I don't think we've quite counted the cost of it yet.
Yeah, the sensationalism, get back to the profiteering motive in journalism, that sensationalism sells. I think people today are finding the idea of journalistic ethics more and more specious. And most of the time when people appeal to journalistic ethics, it's because they don't like what the journalists are producing, and it's a way to make an ad hominem attack on their character. But certainly there are some principles that journalists should follow. And as a Catholic journalist, no doubt the messages from the World Day of Communications that popes continue to put out every year on the Feast of St. Francis de Sales, they do give us some guidance. So what are those cornerstone principles that the church communicates to us about what journalism is in that highest and noblest sense?
Well, I think the thing that the church has always said about the idea of journalism, and I think this applies in and out of the church. The foundational principle of journalism is the truth, that the mission of the church is the truth. The mission of the church is to communicate the truth, that this is the great mission, if you like, of the church. All evangelization is rooted in the proclamation of the truth. And I think in the journalistic space, it's the job of reporters, it's the job of journalists to speak first the truth, and to speak first the truth with love. And I think that's another way in which we can slip in journalism away from this lofty ideal of being a facilitator of a noble public conversation. Is you can speak, and we all know this. I mean, this is a fact of human relationships. It's certainly a fact of evangelization, that there are lots of ways to announce the truth. There are ways to announce the truth with anger and with hatred and with judgment. And there are ways to just announce the truth with love. And that doesn't mean uncritically. It doesn't mean that you don't announce awkward truths or truths that some people perhaps would rather remain unsaid, but you can still do that with love. And I think that at its best, this is the underpinning of all Catholic journalism, is to speak the truth with love about and to the church. And, I think a lot of people think about the church, we speak about, journalism covering the church. They think of it purely in terms of the hierarchy. And for sure that, the hierarchy, the center of, if you like, in many respects, Catholic life, because they're the center of the church's governing function and everything. But the church is a society. The church is a perfect society, we say in canon law, not flawless, but complete. It has everything. It's intact unto itself. It doesn't need anything external to function as a society. We have our own laws. We have our own values. We have our own government. We have, all of that. And we have to cover, I think, as Catholic journalists, we have to cover well the whole of that society of the church. And if we do that, it serves what I think we really have lost in Catholicism, especially in this country, in the last several decades, which is a sense of that common society in the church, that the society of the church, particularly the United States, has become, I think, as culturally fractured as sort of wider American society. And that if we begin to reappreciate and recommunicate the fact that we are not, Democrat Catholics or Republican Catholics or whatever else, but that we are Catholics, we are a people apart, we are a society all of our own. And when we speak as Catholics, it's not just about what we think about this bishop or that bishop, but it's about how do we think about education? How do we think about healthcare? How do we think about love of our neighbor? But we do so as Catholics first. I think that would change and challenge a lot of our preconceptions about what it is to be a practicing Catholic right now.
We're speaking with Ed Condon. He is co-founder and editor of The Pillar. It's an online Catholic news publication that's digging into a lot of important stories, both in the church and in the world. We're grateful for him to be joining us on The Bridge Builder today. Ed, when in a culture that no longer values truth, and if you think that's the highest pursuit of journalism is getting at the truth, journalism, it seems more and more is really about telling one's preferred version of the story. In a culture, there was one person on Twitter just recently said the difference between theism and atheism is that theists believe that truth is the highest calling of human life, and the atheist believes at a practical level that the pursuit of power is the highest calling. And sometimes with the pursuit of power, we have the desire to tell our preferred version of the story as a means of advancing that power. Would you see that the secularization is one of the problems with where journalism is and where it's going today? It's really about telling one's preferred story and not getting at the truth for the naked pursuit of power?
I think secularism plays a part in it, because anything that exists in Catholic society to an extent reflects or apes wider society. It's inevitable. One is the tail, one is the dog, at least in terms of size. And of course, the mission of the church is to be the tail that wags the dog, reverses that, if you like. I think there's a lot of truth to the idea that a very secularized mentality can lead to that kind of prizing of personal narrative and advancing your side first. I don't know that I'd link it necessarily specifically to the idea of atheism, but I think what atheism and secularism have is an honesty about where they perceive the playing field to be, which is if you basically are, and I know that every good humanist would dispute this characterization, but as far as I can see, I've never been able to understand how if you're an atheist, you're not also a nihilist, because then we're just specks on a rock, and what's it all for? And I think if you start from that premise, then sure, why not have everything be about trying to get the furthest for your own? That in a sense just makes sense. Whereas if you are approaching it from a perspective of faith, then you understand that everything is oriented to a higher good. You understand that that is the real context in which you're functioning and working. So I do think that that can bleed over, but also within the church. I mean, before we had secularism as a reality in the sort of wider culture, we had these problems in the church. We had the problem of people pushing narrative. We had, this in a sense how we got the Reformation. That the sins of mass media, if you like, started as the sins of defectors from the church. That Martin Luther was in a sense a journalist advancing a particular point of view. And I think what we need in the church and in journalism more widely is an understanding of journalism can't be both at the same time. I don't necessarily believe that it can't be both, but I think people need to be honest with themselves and each other, which one they're being. So, for example, at the Pillar, we try very hard to be. We do news and analysis. We don't do commentary. JD, my business partner, and I have a weekly newsletter that we each write where we kind of let our opinions out and stuff. But in terms of what's on the website, we don't do our opinions or anyone else's opinions. And I consider that to be a service to truth. There are other outlets, Catholic and non-Catholic, secular, that are expressly they're there for commentary. That's what they're there for. There are places where you can go to find what certain people think about certain things and how they would argue it. And I think that's good and healthy too. I think that's part of a conversation of journalism. Where I see a risk is when you have the real blurring of those two things. When you read news reports, news accounts, then you aren't quite sure, is this a recitation of the complete factual picture that I can then form my own analysis and opinion of, or am I being given a selective presentation of facts with someone's opinion baked in on it to try and skew me? And I think that's where things get dangerous. And we see this a lot in wider media and secular media as well as Catholic media. I mean, to take an example that cuts across both is the way that the Holy Father is covered. Pope Francis can say that abortion is homicide, abortion is the hiring of a hitman, abortion is Nazi eugenics with white gloves, until he's blue in the face, and he does. But many of the Catholic and secular outlets that love covering Pope Francis more than anything else, you simply can't find those quotes in their presentation of him. You would be left very much with the opinion that Pope Francis doesn't particularly care about abortion. And it just ain't so. And I think that's the kind of journalism that presents a risk. It presents a risk to the reader, and it presents a risk to the society, which hopefully good journalism, and again, of both kinds, whether it's the factual and analytical or the commentary kind, is playing a role in shaping and helping form a cohesive whole.
This question probably is going to come off as somewhat incoherent, but walk with me on this one. That I think we can, journalists are famous for comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. We've heard slogans like sunlight is the best disinfectant. You can see, I think, clearly the connection between journalism and widely distributed information in a democratic society where people are making decisions and they need the information to make those decisions. If we're going to have a representative democracy, that seems pretty clear. You note that the church is also its own society with its rules, laws, structures. You're a canon lawyer. We have our own legal system. We are truly a perfect society in the strict sense of that term, but we're not a democracy. We have people who have the particular charism of teaching, governing, and sanctifying. We also have a journalistic class and the secular world that is all too happy to expose the sins of our clergy and our people and talk about the problems in the church. We're just reading about the horrible malfeasance and abuse in France, for example. So in that context, where does Catholic journalism fit in? What should Catholic journalism be focusing on, given we have people in the secular world who are all too happy to put sunlight on what's going on in the church. We don't have a democratic church. It's a hierarchical church. So where does Catholic journalism fit into that? What sort of information do the people of God need within the context of the society we call the church?
Well, I don't think the truth is something which you gain a privileged access to by virtue of living in a democracy. The truth is its own virtue. And I think that applies within the society of the church as well. It goes back a little bit to what I was saying earlier about, you can announce the truth a lot of different ways. You can announce the truth with an eye towards vandalizing the institution that you're helping scrutinize, or you can do it with love and the hope of encouraging a sincere conversation and, where necessary, reform. I came into Catholic journalism sort of sideways around 2016 on a part-time basis, as I was still practicing as a canon lawyer and everything. And I started writing about Vatican finances because that was something that was kicking off. And I happened to know a little bit about it at the time. Now it's kind of a waking fascination for me. But as I got drawn more and more into Catholic journalism, the thing that I saw was the need to present the sorts of things in the life of the institutional church that require sunlight as a disinfectant, require the announcement of the truth of a situation, because that's how conversion happens. The Lord was very clear: what is done in the dark will be brought into the light. Anyone who prefers the darkness has got a problem. Everything
that's hidden shall be revealed.
Exactly. And I think there is a loving and respectful way in which Catholic journalism can do that with the church, because, the church is an institution that is both human and divine. Does authentic Catholic journalism ever attack the divine character of the church, attack the sacraments, attack the dignity of the priesthood? Certainly not. Never. That, the self-evident truths to which Catholicism should hold itself are the magisterium of the church. But at the same time, the church is a human institution. It's made up of people, and those people are sinners. We all are. And understanding how the church can survive as a divine institution administered by earthly sinners, I think is a challenge for every Catholic, but it's also a challenge that is served by thoughtful and honest discussion about what that dichotomy really means in the daily life of the church. But also, I think there are things in the church that have been done very badly for generations, but are now being done in a very different way. And that is the result of sometimes unflinching, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes very unwelcome journalistic investigation. And, the church has, I'd say, a fairly consistent record on not always welcoming reform when the need presents itself. And I think part of the charism of Catholic journalism is you have to accept that if you're touching on things that make life very awkward for some parts of the institutional hierarchy, you're not going to be thanked for it. But at the same time, it's important that you don't revel in that. And that, there are quote unquote media, Catholic media, although I hesitate to fold them in with the wider Catholic media space, that, basically traffic and profiteer on rumors, propaganda, smear campaigns, things like that. And there's no place for calling that either journalism or Catholic, in my opinion, because it's just profit driven and, it's trying to drag eyes and clicks and things. That doesn't help anyone. But on the other hand, if you're willing to really serve the church with the firm intention of doing it out of love for Christ's church, to say, look, this is the truth of the situation and it requires an answer. The people of God are not without rights, even though this is not a democracy and never should be. But the people of God are not without rights. They have a dignity in their baptism of very radical equality, according to Vatican II. And that comes with a certain responsibility. That comes with a certain responsibility, both for the lay people to participate in the life of the church in a serious way, and also for the church to recognize and accept and accommodate that. I mean, we lay people also have, and this is in the Code of Canon Law, lay people have the right, according to their station and their expertise, to make known their opinions to their pastors, to their governors in the church, and say, I don't agree with this, and here's why. Now, it doesn't mean you get to send them petitions saying, we demand that you, the bishop, do what we say because we've got 800 signatures. No, that's not how it works. But there is a space in the society of the church and in the law of the church for thoughtful debate And I think, the more seriously we take that, the more serious a debate we'll get out of it.
Indeed, beautifully said. And we did a whole other episode on that whole process of making one's opinions known to the bishop. So you're right. And thank you for walking with me in that question. And I think getting really to the heart of the matter of what the issues are and what's at stake. The Pillar is really a fantastic source of both news, but also some really good commentary. And me reaching out to you to be on the show was occasioned by one of those columns in which you talked about a number of things, whether it's Fulton Sheen's potential canonization, but also some comment on the deeper meaning of the failed nation building experiment in Afghanistan and what that all means there. And you noted that perhaps that experiment failed because we're operating in abstractions. We can't build a society in another country because we don't have the right foundations and principles with which to construct a healthy society in the US. Say a little bit about your reflections on what you saw within the withdrawal and that failed experiment in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think what I noticed, and I don't think Afghanistan's the first place we should notice this, but I think it was particularly stark, is that when we go into countries like Afghanistan or Iraq or places like that with the sort of conscious or unspoken intention of nation building, usually to replace a regime or a way of life like the Taliban, which we deem to be bad and wrong. In the Taliban's case, it certainly was and is again now. But we tend to go in there with no clear idea of what it is we want to bring the people, except freedom and democracy. That, these sort of words, it's freedom and democracy have become sort of linked as an idiom in foreign policy, particularly in invasive foreign policy, and they become almost like a catchphrase that has its own sort of hidden subtext to it. It's like saying fair and balanced in journalism. It's become a sort of trademark. This may not be just or praise and worship. It's like you can parse the words, but it won't give you the totality of what this actually means. And freedom and democracy are nice things. That's fine. No one has a problem with that. But freedom for what? And democracy for what? And I think what we have done in the United States is we started off with, and I mean, this is evident from the writings of the founding fathers. It's evident from the writings of John Adams, Washington, all of them, that there was a common philosophical, not quite theological, but philosophical in a deep sense, a common premise. And we've gotten away from that. And instead, what we are left with is this architecture of our civil society, which is, well, we vote to elect leaders. Okay. And we have the freedom to speak our mind and to make certain choices. Okay. But that's not a system of values. Those are organizing principles that facilitate the flourishing of certain values, that facilitate the functioning of a society that has a common value system. And some people like to make the argument that we've sort of rejected or ejected what's called the Judeo-Christian foundations of American society. I don't know that we've rejected or rejected them, but I think increasingly they've become a minority, albeit plurality belief in this country. But that's just a function of multiculturalism. But without that consensus, all we've done is our freedom and democracy, and I think we've seen this over the last decade or two, is it just gives a marketplace for a very, very angry, fractured public debate. Now, if we try and bring that into a country like Afghanistan, they don't understand the freedom and democracy trademark, what that means. You're going to vote to elect your leaders. Why? What's the higher purpose that is served by that? We've come to view our sort of civil architecture as a higher good in itself, when it's not. It's mechanistic. It's a means to an end. But what is the end? And so when we go into these other countries like Afghanistan, we're only offering means. We have no end to point them towards, and we no longer have the sort of grounding in it ourselves that we can bring out and say, well, this is why our society works and why we think you might like it. Like, we don't know what it is that we're trying to offer. It's fruit from a tree that we've cut off at the roots. And, can you blame people for rejecting that? Can you be surprised that it doesn't take root in a place like Afghanistan? And as soon as we pull out, the Taliban come rolling back in, because they know what they're about. They know what their value system is. It's monstrous in some cases, but there's no confusion about it. And that, I think, will always trump a sort of hollow, sterile, well, we have a system of ways in which you can elect your government. So what? That's not an organizing principle for society. That's not a goal or a cause to which you can dedicate your life, or still less your country, to say, well, we vote. That's what we do. That's the higher cause. It doesn't make any sense. Voting is nice. Don't get me wrong. It's, a democracy like ours presents, I think, the best opportunity for the best possible outcome for the best number of people, and all those things. I think it's good civil architecture in that sense. But if you ask me to ascribe to it moral value, let alone foundational moral value for a society, it's no, it's not. That's not what it's for. And I don't think it's how anyone would have conceived of it 200 years ago.
Yeah, you can't build a society on John Rawls's theory of liberalism. I'm really taken with your analysis, but then I was reading my recent edition of the New Criterion yesterday, and there was an article called Duchamp in Kabul, talking about a course that was being put on for Afghans by the US government at great expense, talking about conceptual art, and then showing these Afghans Duchamp's the toilet, the famous toilet, which he called the fountain, and conceptual art. And then later on in the story, where it talks about how we spent $787 million on gender programs. So was it the case that the nation building experiment in Afghanistan was about conceptual abstractions like freedom and democracy, or was there a substantive vision of the good being proposed? Perhaps a substantive vision of the good, maybe the deconstruction of Western values, so to speak, that was rejected by a more traditional society like Afghanistan?
I don't know. The thing is, conceptual art and postmodern art and things like gender theory, I kind of view as having the same, as being in the same bucket. They are essentially, in my opinion, the fruit, the sort of toxic byproduct of a free society that you will eventually get if you have freedom and democracy, not freedom and democracy trademark, but actual freedom and actual democracy present enough in a society. It's like alcohol and fermentation. You're going to get that, you're going to get a society that sort of slightly cannibalizes itself at the margins. You're going to get thought that turns in on itself and attacks its own roots. That this is necessary. And like alcohol and fermentation, a little bit could be kind of fun and, make things nice. But if you let the process get out of control, it can poison the entire ecosystem. And I think that's a lot of what we're getting here. I don't know that I would accept having the fountain and, sort of conceptual art and gender theory being pushed at great expense in Afghanistan as a coherent or cohesive vision that's being offered, because I don't believe either one of them articulate or represent a coherent or cohesive vision. I think both of them are essentially decadent byproducts of a very coherent and cohesive vision. And this is another reason why I think even concerted and expensive efforts to impose or instill or seed the ground with those ideas never work. Is you can't plant the seed of criticism of something else and expect that will turn into its own thing. The idea of gender theory makes no sense unless you have an understanding of how Western civilization has always grown and evolved and spoken about into itself. That it's an entirely self-critical and introverted way of thinking. And so you can't just take that as its own positive vision and try and implant it somewhere. It doesn't make any sense. It's like asking someone to understand the notion of cinema by trying to plant a particularly angry film review. It's like you don't know anything about how to make movies. You've just read this angry critique of something that you don't know what it is. And I think that's what we're looking at with whether it's the fountain or whether it's gender theory. But what it does show is that the people who are there, the people who are making these decisions, that's all they understand as a positive vision. That's all they understand. I think that speaks to the brokenness of where we are as a society more widely in the West and the United States, surely, is that we think that the sort of toxic byproduct self-criticism is a positive ethos. And I think that's really sad. Peter Cook told a joke, the English comedian Peter Cook told a joke back in the 60s where he traveled in the United States and he was asked what he thought of it. And he said, "I love America. what I really admired about them was their common purpose and their common positive ethos. They really do believe in anti-communism. It's so hard to find a positive ethos like that these days. And that's what I think of when I see things like people promoting gender theory, or, this sort of very warped, deconstructed view of human nature. Is, yeah, they really believe in something, but it's not its own thing. What they really believe is they're anti something else. They're anti everything that has come before. And that's no way to run anything. That's no way to build a society. It's no way to build a culture. You can't construct anything from a mentality that only is about poisoning and wrecking that which came before.
Maybe the Protestantism of our nation is really deep in the DNA more than we realize.
I think so. I think even in the Catholic Church in the United States, this is the great sort of joke, is Italian Catholics are sacramentalized pagans, and American Catholics are sacramentalized Protestants or Puritans.
That's what Cardinal George said. Even in America, the Catholics are Protestants or Calvinists or something like that. So, Ed Condon, what a blessing to have you on the show. The Pillar has situated itself as an important resource for Catholics, and it's termed what's going on in the church, and certainly a resource to the wider world as well. Where can people go to learn more about the Pillar and subscribe to keep your good resource going?
Everything we've got is at pillarcatholic.com. People are welcome to come. I stress it is free to sign up. We view our journalism as a service. So there's definitely the option to pay, and we would encourage anyone who can to please do, because that's how we're going to keep this going. But try it for free. We try and take seriously the idea that the mission of Catholic journalism is to speak first the truth with love. So we invite people to come, see for yourself.
Thanks for your work, Ed Condon. Pillarcatholic.com is where you can go. Thanks for joining us on the Bridge Builder today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Blessings. And we'll be back in a month with our practical tip of the week. Welcome back to the Bridge Builder, where we help you bridge the gap between faith and public life. I'm Jason Adkins, and now we're turning to our communications manager, Kit Sapiniak, for this week's action item. Kit, what do you have?
Yeah, so this week, to start building that bridge between faith and public life, we want to let our listeners know about a service that we're providing to help them connect with their elected officials. By becoming a member of the Catholic Advocacy Network, we are notifying people who are members when your state legislators are holding a town hall meeting. So we're kind of doing all that groundwork of gathering that, and then we'll let you know. And we'll even give you some great questions, maybe some topics that you might want to address with them, so you don't have to head into that meeting really unaware or feeling inequipped. So in order to receive notifications on when those town hall meetings are, make sure to sign up for the Catholic Advocacy Network. It's really easy. The web address is mncatholic.org/action center, and then click on join. Jason, some people are probably wondering, what is a town hall? What's the point of attending a town hall meeting?
Elected officials will hold these town halls as forums for, sharing what they're doing, working on what they think are their accomplishments, and then also soliciting citizen feedback and input. There's usually kind of an open mic dynamic to those as well, but it gives everyone an opportunity to interact with their legislators, call them out when they see there are problems, or praise them when they think they're doing a good job on things. And those are equally important for legislators who give a lot of their time and life to serving the public good. As Kit said, we equip people to attend those town halls with good questions related to issues on which the Catholic Conference is particularly concerned. And we think that holding their feet to the fire a little bit on some of these questions and making them explain themselves on difficult issues is really, really important. They need to hear from you. Half of politics is about showing up. So these town halls are built-in, easy ways to engage with your legislator, and we want to help make you aware of them. And that's why joining the Catholic Advocacy Network is a great resource to you, as we help connect the dots and make it easier, not just about what you should say, but when you can and should say it as well. So a great resource at the Catholic Advocacy Network.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jason. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, whether it was online, on the radio, or on your favorite podcast app. Remember to go to our YouTube channel, and click on subscribe, and then you'll be notified every time a new episode comes out. That's also where you can find all of our extended conversations that don't always fit into a half-hour radio show. And you can also leave us a comment when you're there or send us an email. Go to show@mncatholic.org. That's where you can send us an email. Or you can find past episodes at mncatholic.org/podcast.
Thanks again for tuning in today to The Bridge Builder. We'll be back again next week with another great guest. More of your comments and questions and a practical tip building the bridge between faith and public life. I'm Jason Atkins, and for Kitsapiniac, thanks for tuning into The Bridge Builder. God bless your day.